So I bet if I photoshopped out the flag on this photograph, not too many of you would know that this is in southern China, southwestern China, this mosque, right? It certainly doesn't look Chinese, does it? In fact, we're about 160 kilometers north of the Vietnamese border in south-central Yunnan province. And one of the reasons I like this photo so much is precisely because of the counterposing of the PRC flag with this new mosque. This mosque was finished construction about 5 years ago. It is reputed to be the largest mosque in China and can accommodate 10,000 worshipers at a time. Okay. So my research question really is, what's the status and role of Islam in contemporary China? It sort of bleeds into the larger issue of religion, the nexus of religion and citizenship. I'm particularly interested in Islam for a whole bunch of reasons, not least of which is the fact that Islam kind of occupies a type of liminal space that most other religious systems in China don't. It's liminal in terms of the fact that it is seen, depending on who you ask and where you stand, either as a native or a foreign, i.e. Western religion. It's also seen either as a socially acceptable religious practice or a group of terrorist thugs that want to secede from China. And I'm also interested in Chinese Muslims in this particular province of Yunnan, also because of liminality of Yunnan as a space. I'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. That's my research question for this particular project. And my answer is quite simply, the Western pundits have it largely wrong when they characterize Islam in China as mainly a terrorist and counter-state discourse. Because most of the Western pundits, including people in the State Department, tend to look at only the Uyghurs. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Uyghurs are just one small group of Muslims in China, and by far from dominating the discourse in the local scene. But most people don't go out into the local scene. So one of my projects is to refresh our understanding of Islam as a normative part of the Chinese social, religious, and political landscape. So that's where I'm going with this project. One thing I have to point out is China's huge heterogeneity. This is a screenshot of the language landscape across China. I don't have time to go into this, but you can see that there are several different language families represented in China, and this is a very simplistic scheme or understanding or representation of the Chinese social and linguistic landscape. Where we're going is down into the far southwestern corner of China, and I'll get there in just a moment. The questions that I'm asking are actually rather complex and intertwined, dealing with identity, citizenship, and also location. I'm a historian, and one of the things I've become increasingly concerned about is the lack of geographic awareness by historians. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to push our grad students in the history department to think in terms of spatiality and location. Geography really determines social action, and nowhere more so in China. And certainly in Yunnan province, the place where my work is situated, you can go literally 30 miles as the crow flies, and you can be in an entirely different ethnic group who can't understand the people 30 miles to the west or east of them because they speak an entirely different language. They have different social and religious customs. So there's all of these issues intertwined. Ethnicity obviously is a huge issue in China. What Minzu do you belong to? Minzu is the term that is loosely translated as race or nation or people. And it's a very difficult term to actually translate adequately in a single term. And then, of course, Jiao, which religion do you belong to? The term Jiao, for those of you who are Chinese linguistic specialists, actually comes from Buddhism and describes the teachings of a particular school of Buddhism. But now it is actually used universally to describe religion, including Islam. And then, of course, we get into citizenship and location. Okay, 1 minute on the history of Islam because in China, because when I ask most people who don't know anything about China, is China part of the Islamic world? The answer is almost universally no, except that that's not the case, because there are probably between 22 and 45 million Muslims living in China. But yet, if you go to any geographic atlas of the Islamic world, China is not represented. It's a very interesting issue. It's been in China for a long time. Started out in the 7th century, right after the death of the Prophet. It really blossomed in the 13th century with the Mongol conquests and has grown from there. 1911, it was one of 5 major nationality groups that Sun Yat-sen used to construct the new Republic of China. He had to have the 5 groups all at the table. Otherwise, China would be, the nation that we think of as China today would be about the 1/3 the size of what it is now. After 1950, there was a whole project by the People's Republic to identify national minority groups. They started out identifying some 480 separate minority groups, ended up identifying 55 national minority groups. And by the way, the term for national minority group, the Chinese term is literally the little peoples, the Xiaoshu Minzu. So it's an interesting concept, this whole business of nationality in China. Post 9/11, like I said, the whole issue of Islam in China, at least on the outside of China, has really been conflated with terrorism. 5 minutes left? Holy moly. Okay, on to this. There's Yunnan. Okay, what I want to focus on, is this phrase, ai guo, ai jiao, love the state and love the teaching. And you see this in most mosques that are populated by Chinese Muslims. Not so much Uyghurs. That's a separate issue, but I'm not going there. Let's just give you a couple of examples of Islam in daily life. This is a village entrance to a Muslim town in southern Yunnan. One thing I'd point out to you is the architecture of the gate. It's very traditionally Chinese. The gate entrance to the village always looked like this in the imperial period, but it's clearly also invoking Islamic themes. Here is a middle school in Kunming, the provincial capital. And one of the things I want to point out to you, architecturally, it's very obvious that this is an Islamic middle school. The title of the school, though, is interesting and important. And here's where we get this melding of ai guo, ai jiao, because it's called the Manifesting Virtue Nationalities Middle School. This term, manifesting virtue, Mingde, comes from the Confucian Analects, and it is one of the core concepts of classical Confucian and Chinese identity. So there's a complete melding of these two concepts in Chinese society. I happened to be fortunate enough to be in Yunnan on the day when the Chinese Muslim community celebrated the birth of the Prophet. And I was in a neighborhood, and the local Hui community was having a feast. And these are just some women preparing part of the meal. Here's another interesting concept. You see the ai guo character, well, maybe you don't, but basically the emblem says, a teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, to love the state is one element in faith. But I want you to take a look. It's probably not really apparent here, but this is in a small museum dedicated to honoring or really beatifying Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution. The museum is run by a Chinese Muslim guy who is a very pious Muslim and yet completely identifies also with Mao and the pre-opening up period of China. So it's quite an interesting concept. Heterogeneity among the Chinese Muslim community is pretty widespread. I'm showing you this photograph because it is even more hybrid. The guy down in the far right-hand corner is the imam of the local mosque in a small village in southern Yunnan. He's Chinese. He's married to a Syrian woman who can't speak a word of English. They have kids who speak a combination of English, Chinese, and Arabic. Fascinating. I stayed with this family for a couple of nights and had a bunch of great conversations. This is the gate to his local mosque, and you can see that it's a very small place. Finally, two things that I want to point out in terms of the importance of the Chinese Muslim community to larger networks. And certainly in Yunnan, the Chinese Muslim community is involved in trans-regional, transnational business networks. This is the front page of a December 2014 forum on international Muslim enterprises that took place in the provincial capital. And companies from Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, the USA was a notable omission, all participated in this. And finally, Xi Jinping's relatively new policy of one belt, one road. And the one thing I want to point out to you is you see Yunnan's important role down in kind of the center of the slide, the 4 entry points between Yunnan province and southeastern Asia. Okay, let me finish up. Yunnan and the Chinese state is using the Chinese Muslim community, or they're using each other to build these transnational linkages. I don't have time to talk about how the discourse on citizenship changed. I can talk about that in Q&A. That's it. Thank you.